The Dr. Taz Show, the podcast. Dr. Taz, Superwoman Wellness. Here's Dr. Taz.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Superwoman Wellness, where we are determined to bring you back to your superpowered self. Speaking of being superpowered, we know we as women depend on our hormones for balance, for so many different aspects of our health, but it still seems really elusive, right? It still seems like we can't get the answers we need. Joining me today, I'm thrilled. She was on my retreat and she is back to educate us, is Alisa Vitti. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about her. She's a women's hormone and functional nutrition expert and pioneer in female biohacking, right? I love that. Female biohacking. She's the best-selling author of The Woman Code and her new book, In the Flow. She's the creator of Cycle Syncing Method, a female-centric diet and lifestyle program that leverages hormonal patterns for optimal health, fitness, and productivity. She's got all these great credentials, guys. I'd be here all day reading these, but she's been on numerous shows. She's on lots of talks. She's been on Oz, Talks at Google, all this other good stuff. Let me welcome in my colleague and somebody I just respect so much. Alisa, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking time out to join us today.
Oh, I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me back. It was such a joy to connect with you on your retreat. So it's a treat to be back talking again.
Well, it blew my mind on the retreat. And I think my surprise was pretty obvious there.
Yes.
In terms of how you think about hormones. And, we both are in alignment with understanding that women's health and women's hormones are not really being addressed fully. There's so many gaps there. And we need to move that needle forward for all of us. But the infraredian rhythm, and not to jump directly into that topic, but it blew my mind because in medical school, we are taught the circadian rhythm. We're taught about periods and hormone cycles, but we're never taught the infraredian rhythm, unless I fell asleep in that class until
No, you didn't. Listen, let's keep in mind the science of chronobiology, or the division within biology called chronobiology, that's all focused on looking at biological rhythmic patterns and systems in the body. That's a relatively young science. And so it's still evolving. And so, of course, it's not something that's going to be standardized, included in textbooks. And so, no, I don't think you fell asleep at all.
Okay. Right?
Rest assured. No, I mean,
I'm teasing.
It's really just not yet made it into a mainstream conversation. The fact that we have mainstreamed the concept around the circadian rhythm is huge progress from a chronobiological point of view. But I mean, I don't even think people really understand the term chronobiology, which is this idea of the timing of the functions and systems of the body, right? That's sort of what that science looks at. And it's fascinating, and I think it's the missing key, especially for women. I mean, and we know that male biohackers are really those that are serious about it as men and biohacking. They're fully invested into supporting their circadian rhythm and synchronizing with that biological rhythm as much as they can to optimize their health outcomes. This is a very good piece of logic that women should be applying, but we have to appreciate that we have a completely different biological rhythm in addition to the circadian rhythm that we have to factor in. And that was sort of my big aha. I've been, as you were so generous to share about my background, but I mean, I've been working with women's health and hormonal health care for the past 2 decades. First in a practice in Manhattan, and then in the past decade, sort of through our digital hormonal healthcare company called Flow Living. And in the past 5 years, I mean, for all those 2 decades, what I noticed, and I'm sure what you notice, is this conversation for women about hormonal healthcare hasn't gotten enough support, right? And just talking about periods was difficult enough, right? But then I got really excited because about 5 years ago, there was this big tectonic shift in the cultural narrative, right? We had Kiran Gandhi run the London Marathon without any menstrual products while she was menstruating. And so everybody could see her bleeding, right, while she was running the marathon. And that sparked a whole millennial Instagram explosion of breaking down the taboo. And I was really there for it. Yay. I thought, great, this is going to change everything. And then what I did see was all this wonderful snowballing of things in the wellness media, on wonderful sites like Well and Good and Mind Body Green, who were really mainstreaming a conversation about, well, what should we know about menstruation? What should we know about our hormones? And Um, and I thought, great, finally now women are going to have the thing that's been, holding them back really, which is information, right? If you don't
Right.
have the information, you can't, I think of any analogy you want. I hate to use a car analogy because it feels a little masculine, but if you don't know how the thing works, how are you supposed to drive it anywhere,
Right.
right? Similarly, if you don't know how your hormones work, how can you take care of them properly? And that's really been a huge problem that I see women having. So I was watching and I was waiting and I was looking at the statistics thinking things were going to get dramatically better. But I was shocked and upset instead, which to really see that there are these two really profound statistics that we should know about as women. One is that right now, as we're speaking, 50% of women are struggling with a hormone issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that compounded onto that is that 80% of women at some point in their lifetime will have a hormonal issue. This is staggering.
Yep.
Staggering. And when we compare that to the male cohort, I mean, 80% of men are not having a hormonal problem. It's just, we're just not even in the same galaxy. So I, being sort of the researcher, systems thinker that I am, I kind of needed, I kept asking myself, what is happening? What is the salient difference between these two gendered cohorts that one is struggling so profoundly more than the other? What are we missing? What is going on? And I kept digging and digging and digging. And that's when I stumbled upon this infraredian and circadian rhythms, looking at the fact that we have this secondary biological rhythm in addition to the circadian rhythm as females that's activated at puberty. It's only active from your first bleed to your last. And it really governs so many systems of the body, right? Beyond just when you're ovulating and menstruating, right? Just like we know the circadian rhythm governs more than just when you're sleeping and waking, right?
Right.
This infraredian circadian effect, this affects our brain, our metabolism, our immune response system, our stress response system, and our reproductive system. So if you've been wondering all these years, like why you have weight issues and mood issues and immune issues and fertility issues and libido issues, they don't all need a different solution.
Right.
It turns out what they need is for us to stop disrupting the biological rhythm that is trying to conduct this very elegant orchestra in perfect harmony. And when we keep disrupting it with using diets and workout plans and methodologies that are not aligned with that biological rhythm, we experience symptoms across the board. And I got really excited about that enough to write a second book. And, I thought also we needed a methodology to support this rhythm. And that's where the cycle syncing method was created to help women use food, fitness, and time management, if you will, to better align with this biological rhythm in a very similar way to the way that we know how to align with our circadian rhythm, but to do it in a female specific way.
So we're going to break this down a little bit because there's a whole lot that you just said. So the idea of chronobiology, how would you best describe that? That everything living, everything breathing has a rhythm to it, has a rhythm based on time. Is that the best way to think about it or describe it? How would you describe that?
Yeah, chronos is the Greek word for time. And so it's the idea of the timing of the science of life, right? The biology, the time. There's your body, is a biological system, and it's not linear. It turns out all the time, right? There are certain rhythmic patterns that are cyclical. There are patterns that are sort of linear. And so we do have these different rhythms in the body that really run the show, right? And it makes sense because think about how complex just the human ecosystem is, between the brain and just the kidney alone is so remarkable.
Right.
So it makes sense that there's a timekeeping system in the body to orchestrate all of these different functions and the timing of the sub-functions within each system, let's say the immune system, so that the body is not doing everything at once. That is not efficient. And what we know about nature is that nature prefers an elegant and efficient, sort of solution, right? And that's what we have when we look at things through the lens of chronobiology. It's that we don't have all these disparate things that are taking place, that we actually have them within a timed ecosystem, and that the more we support the timing, the less we have to try to support each and every little function. It makes our job of taking care of ourselves so much simpler, actually, right? And we know this from all the studies that were done, the Boston nurses study on circadian disruption, right? So, for example, we know that if you were to sleep for 5 minutes and then be up for 2 days, you would really disrupt a lot of the systems of your body. We know our insulin levels would go crazy, our cortisol patterns would be disrupted. That's in the short term. We also know that that would compound and create massive disease vulnerability for the long term, right? So again, we just haven't applied this to the female ecosystem because we have overlooked the importance of this cyclical pattern that we have. And so we keep, as women, trying to do things that are circadian only with our
Right.
self-care,
Right.
but that ironically ends up disrupting a lot of this other biological rhythmic pattern that we have.
So let's break down the infraredian rhythm then. Would you say that's primarily, how would we measure it, know it? Is it primarily hormonal? Is it kind of with our cycles? Does it apply to menopause? Like, how would we,
Right.
how do we put our hands on that rhythm, so to speak?
So there's the infraredian and the circadian, where that everybody's getting again, chronobiology is such a new area of science. I think we're learning more every single day. But the idea is that we have this second biological rhythm, and we experience that over the course of our 28-day cycle approximately, right? Just like the circadian rhythm, we experience it over 24-hour day,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that's how you would experience it. However, just like the circadian rhythm doesn't just control your sleep wake cycle, but it controls, let's say, the timing of when your blood pressure is more or less elevated throughout the day naturally, or the timing when your bowels are more active versus least active, right? Let's just even look at that for a minute, right? Isn't it so advantageous that you have a circadian clock that's orchestrating the timing of bowel movements? If you did not, right, then let's say you were in deep REM state of sleep
Mhm.
without anything governing the timing of other functions of the body, right? You could wake up in the middle of that REM state needing to have a large bowel movement, and then you
Right.
would disrupt, like you would not, there's nothing about that that would be efficient,
Right.
right?
Right.
So similarly, the infradian circadian rhythms, this is really about how do we organize the fact that your brain is being stimulated, for example, just by the modulation of estrogen over the course of the cycle, right? How do we have a pattern around that? How do all these changing hormones affect our immune response, our metabolic response, right? There's a timing to all of this, in addition to the very tactical things that we see with our cycle, right? So for example, we know that these hormonal ratios that take place in the follicular, the ovulatory, the luteal, and the menstrual phases, these are the 4 phases of your cycle. They do things like grow follicles on the ovary, cause one of them to be released, build the lining of the uterus, cause that to shed. All of these different hormonal ratios, as they shift, they have this physical effect on the reproductive system. But it also has this whole other effect on other systems of the body that we're just not tying together. And I think that's where we get tripped up.
Mm-hmm. So can we know, like, what's the tactical part of this? Can we know where we are, and do we have a plan for every piece of the rhythm? What should women be doing?
Yes, so that's where the cycle syncing method comes into play. So you know where you are, just like in the circadian rhythm, you know where you are based on what time of day it is, right? If it's the morning, if it's the afternoon, if it's the evening, right? You know where you are, you know kind of what self-care you would want to do, right? Similarly, with our infradian circadian rhythms, if you are in the follicular phase of your cycle, or the ovulatory, or the luteal, or the menstrual, you're going to shift your self-care accordingly. So I
Mm,
like giving some practical examples to
yeah,
help.
yeah.
Let's start with food.
Let's start with this. Hang on,
Yeah.
ladies. Anyone listening? you have to track your cycle. We got to start there, right?
Yes, you
It's
do
like,
have to start
I
there.
don't know. I don't know what day I'm on. I have no idea. You've got to know that stuff, just like you know what you ate for lunch or breakfast or dinner. Please, please, please track your cycle. All right.
No, and actually that's so important because as you know, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists decreed that your period must now be considered a fifth vital sign.
Mhm.
And that's important because the other four we're all accustomed to being taken in the emergency room setting, or we all know in our post-COVID world that, we would take very seriously the biofeedback of an elevated temperature, right? For example.
Right.
And you have been conditioned or trained to know that if you have an elevated temperature, you should do certain things to take care of that. The challenge is we haven't looked at our cycle culturally as an important piece of biofeedback. We've instead maligned it as a curse.
Mhm.
It has all these weird,
Yeah.
like I don't know, cultural associations that have nothing to do with any basis in science.
Right.
And so we throw away this powerful biofeedback that we're getting each and every day. We just don't even, we ignore it. And that's really dangerous because it's dangerous to ignore a fever, right?
Right.
And it's
Mhm.
dangerous to ignore your cycle. If now, especially our medical, powers that be are telling you that it's just as important a biomarker as your temperature, right? So we do have to start tracking every single day. The MyFlow app that I built was, I wanted to build something that wasn't just going to tell you like, hey, you're about to get your period, or hey, you're about to have PMS. That's not, we all know that. We don't necessarily need an app to tell us where we're about to have some symptoms.
Right.
What I thought we needed was an app that would help us track where we are in the cycle, track each symptom, understand why you're having a symptom in each particular phase. For example, the acne that you have during ovulation is very different in root cause origin, than the acne you're having in the luteal phase, right? The week before your period. Tracking which type of acne you're having and when gives you the power to know what to do next. And then the app kind of tells you and gives you guidance from a functional nutrition point of view, what things to do to help deal with this symptom, right? And so tracking, I think, you're absolutely right, the first
The
best
first step.
place to start for sure. And if you're a mom and you have a teenage daughter, get your daughter tracking her cycle as soon as she starts having a cycle, because you want that to just be her normal. Like you taught her how to brush and floss her teeth every night. When it comes time for her to, move into the stage of having a cycle, you want to help normalize for her what
Mhm.
good cycle self-care looks like. And that's an everyday relationship that you're having with your hormones, not one where you avoid, ignore, and wait till there's a crisis to do triage. That is not a healthy relationship
Right.
to have with our bodies, right? You wouldn't do that with your teeth. You shouldn't do that with your period, right? so, um, so tracking is good. And then let's look at sort of just the metabolic impact that this infraredian circadian rhythm has on our month, right? So, for example, um, in the first half of the cycle, well, let me even back up to say that the current thinking is that the best thing that you could do for your health is to strive to endeavor to eat the same amount of calories every day, right? Just about. You want to stay consistent, maintain a good caloric level daily, and that's going to optimize your metabolic response, right?
Mhm.
The thing that you need to know, and this was the other big sort of aha that I had when I wrote the book, was that women are being actively left out of medical fitness and nutrition research because of this biological rhythm and the assumption that it is too complex to study, which is silly when we also then look at the fact that they're doing very nuanced studies around the circadian rhythm, which is a fluctuating dynamic rhythm. And so there is really no more excuse that we could just
Right.
say it's just institutionalized gender bias, and everybody's aware of it, and it's just very slow to make the progress to include women in
Mm.
those studies. So it is what it is, but you do need to be aware of that, because when you are reading the latest and greatest, like, oh, intermittent fasting is the best thing for you, or
Right.
HIIT workouts are the best thing for you, you have to ask yourself the question as a woman in your reproductive years, um, who was the cohort that was studied, right? Was it all genders? Was it all ages? was my age demographic included? Because oftentimes women in the reproductive years are excluded. Women postmenopausally are very much included because it turns out that you go back to a circadian only clock after menopause, right? After your last period. So it's easy to include those women in the studies with the male group. And so the premise of where these truths, and I put that in quotations, air quotes, or these sort of assumptions that we make about what is ideal or optimal, we just have to acknowledge that that is actually based on what is optimal for male biology, right? So it turns out that our metabolism is dynamic, and so it requires dynamically, modulating our caloric intake. So in the first half of your cycle, the follicular and the ovulatory phases, your metabolism is slower relative to yourself, not relative to men. Right. And that's important to say. And you can absolutely eat fewer calories. You can do more, intermittent fasting. You'll feel good with less. Once you're over the ovulatory moment and you're now in the luteal phase, studies show your metabolism speeds up and you need 279 more calories per day. Mm-hmm. And if you don't get them, you're going to do all sorts of disruptive things to your system, right? Because you're going to disrupt insulin, cortisol, and eventually progesterone, and then the next cycle of ovulation, right? So we have to really, again, modulate our caloric intake to match the metabolic reality that is being dynamically affected by this biological rhythm. And if we don't, we then disrupt our hormones. And then over time, we start to really profoundly disrupt this biological rhythm that then, it's like a vicious circle that we want to sort of avoid. So we have to throw out a lot of the things that we've assumed are true about what is optimal around wellness, because it is optimal for a specific gender and their biological rhythm and not ours. And we have to just unhook ourselves from that. And so many women continue to try to restrict calories in the luteal phase, and they're hungry, and their, anxiety is like a huge problem for women that comes really, a lot of it can be resolved just by getting the right caloric intake dialed in throughout the month. If you're eating enough, your brain is going to be functioning more optimally. And we all know what happens when we feel hangry, right? And that's exacerbated in the luteal phase, where you're not getting enough calories if you're waking up sort of half out of a trance, so to speak, at the bottom of a bag of chips or cookies. Right. This is your neurotransmitters taking over for you. When you haven't given yourself enough calories, ghrelin is going to take over, and you're going to eat, but you're not going to make great food choices. So if that is what is going to happen to you, because we are really governed by our biochemistry more than we'd like to admit, what do you want to do? How do you want to play that? Do you want to wait till ghrelin takes over, or do you want to proactively, preemptively front load your caloric intake the way you're supposed to meet your metabolic shift? And I would say we should be doing the latter, right? And so this is what the cycle syncing method will help you do with the food piece, not just on the caloric intake side, but also using food strategically to help with the things that are taking place hormonally. For example, I mentioned the difference between acne in the ovulatory phase versus the luteal phase. So many of us struggle with ovulatory estrogen excess, right? Yeah. We have chin breakouts, we have issues there, mid-cycle pain, etc. There's a food chart in chapter 4 of In the Flow that's going to sort of share with you the ideal foods that are going to really supercharge your liver, which is responsible for breaking down estrogen in its phases of detoxification, to support that whole process, right? And to make sure that it gets out through the gut as quickly as possible. So we're not just looking at caloric intake, although that's one very important piece. We're also looking at how can you use food functionally to support what is happening with the body in each of these phases. So it's a really powerful combination of really, really taking care of your hormones in a way that you've never done before.
So is this shifting between what we do? Would you think of it as like follicular phase, ovulatory phase, luteal phase, and then finally getting your actual period? Would you think of it that way?
Yes.
1 through 7, 8 through 12 or whatever?
Well, and I actually, there's a little section in the book that I kind of, make a case for the fact that, let's face it, the people who were organizing the cycle were guys, right, in an
Yeah.
academic point of view. And I find it really arbitrary. I'm just commenting, this is my opinion.
Right.
I find it arbitrary that we call the first day of the bleed day one of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you experience your cycle, it's not the beginning. When the bleeding happens is not the beginning of your
Right.
cycle, it's the completion of the cycle, right?
That's why no one can get it.
That's right. It does not match our experience. So this
Right.
is arbitrary. I think it's arbitrary as from the female gaze, right? But from the male gaze, it's like, okay, well, we can count. We can count 14 days and then we can know when she's fertile.
Right.
So, it is what it is. But I think instead of getting tripped up on counting the days, it's really just about understanding that each phase does a specific thing. And if you can identify with the thing that the phase is trying to accomplish, the follicular phase is developing eggs in the ovary, the ovulatory phase is releasing one of those eggs, the luteal phase is building the lining of the uterus, and the menstrual phase is shedding that lining, then it really is irrelevant in a way, all the numbers of it. I think if you're trying to conceive, even that is becoming more and more obsolete, like this day 14 thing, because we have technology now where you can measure luteinizing hormone or, really look at things in a more data-based way as opposed to this arbitrary number of counting days, because we don't all ovulate on day 14. It's not necessarily the only thing that we should be striving for. So I argue in the book that we could maybe reclaim our relationship to our cycle phases and the order of that in a way that feels more authentic to the experience that we're having, where the follicular phase is like the beginning of the process, and the menstrual phase is really the end of that process,
Right. Well, what do women do who don't get regular cycles, so don't have the benchmarks? What about women in menopause? What would you say to them? And then what about our teen girls or our young girls? Where do they fit into this puzzle?
So let's start with the menopausal community because it's just so straightforward, right? So this infraredian effect that you have is approximately something you're going to be living with for about 4 decades, right? From your first bleed to your last. Every human has a circadian clock. You will have one all throughout your life. You just have this dual clock system that takes place over these 4 decades. Once you've had your last bleed, which is menopause, and then 12 months later, you then call yourself postmenopausal, you then can go back to a self-care plan that is based on the circadian clock, because that is what is dominant in your body at that time. And that's what will govern your sort of self-care plan at that point, which is why, for example, when we look at the studies on intermittent fasting, which I love talking about so much, because when we look at that, it was done on men and postmenopausal women. And the effect and the benefit of the intermittent fasting routine is equal for men and postmenopausal women. So you get all the benefits of, improved insulin response and cognitive performance and cellular autophagy and all of those good things. But the few studies we have on intermittent fasting, there's not enough because women are excluded in their reproductive years. The few studies we do have for women in the reproductive years shows us the extreme opposite. Because again, if you're doing something like depriving yourself of calories based on a circadian pattern, when you have that plus an infraredian and circadian thing going on, you're going to disrupt these biological rhythms pretty profoundly. And so for women in their reproductive years, intermittent fasting can lead to worsening insulin response, disrupted thyroid, worsening cognitive, so more brain fog, no benefits from a cellular autophagy point of view. And things like shrinking of your ovaries can happen, which is not optimal when you're in your fertile years, right? And so this is what I mean. We need to have a much more nuanced conversation instead of saying, oh, this research just came out, and so now this new thing is good for everyone. We should just say, okay, great. For whom, at what age and stage of life, what gender, or what biological rhythm is dominant in this person, what hormones are they producing naturally? I think it's really important that we start having a little bit more of a biological rhythm awareness based conversation versus just these blanket health and wellness recommendations like this is good for everyone. I mean, this is also true for HIIT workouts.
Right.
Not to pick on intermittent fasting, because to me, I am not dogmatic about it. I think
Right.
use it when it's good for you. So,
Right.
for example, when I'm postmenopausal, I will be doing intermittent fasting because the studies show that that's optimal.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't we do that, right?
Right.
But HIIT workouts, another one that people love to hang their hats on as the optimal thing. Well, it turns out it's not optimal for women depending on which phase you're in. In the first half of the cycle, you can do HIIT workouts and restrict your calories, and you're going to have this net effect of building lean muscle maximally and burning stored fat as fuel maximally. Once you're in the luteal phase and your metabolism has sped up, resting cortisol levels also are higher. And so HIIT workouts are the worst thing you could do, it turns out. Because if you do HIIT workouts in the second half, you're going to be turning on fat storage and turning on muscle wasting. So this whole thing that women beat themselves up over weight management, I'm somebody who has maintained a 60-pound weight loss for 20 years. So I know what this can feel like to struggle with weight. Where this used to happen to me. I would be so committed to whatever workout I was doing, and I'd do the HIIT workout classes and the boot camp classes every day of the month. And sometimes I'd feel really good in the class, and other times I'd feel really drained. But at the end of the month, I would make almost no progress from a weight loss point of view, or worse, I would gain a pound.
Yeah.
And I would just go crazy thinking, what have I done? Because it's not for lack of willpower. It's not for lack of commitment. And I'm just so happy to share that it can be so much easier for you if you simply do the right workout intensity in alignment with what's happening with your biology. Then everything just starts to flow. And that's the idea behind the title of the book, In the Flow, that we can actually achieve a peak flow state as women by really leaning into our biological rhythm as opposed to ignoring it, which is what we've been taught to do. And it's to our detriment, really, truly.
Oh my gosh. So, and here's just a quick example. I think I'm in the ovulatory phase right now.
You are quite glowy today, so it could be.
I was starving today. Like I couldn't, like I usually do some.
So then maybe you're moving into the end of ovulation.
Did my morning yoga, came back. Usually like I'll wait till about 11 or so. I couldn't do it today. And I was like, I'm just going to listen to my body. I am hungry. And I've been hungry the whole morning. I was like, what is wrong with me? Right. But I just counted as we were talking. I'm in that I'm getting ovulatory, headed into the luteal phase shortly. Yeah. So I think that's what's going on.
And I think it's really important. This is why tracking is so important, right? Because you need to know with precision which phase you're in, because guessing can leave you kind of with that hunger gap, right? And a blood sugar mismanagement, which will sort of plague you for the whole day until you go to sleep that night. So it is something that we want to dial in, especially if you're trying to do biohacking, right? Seriously, and you want to optimize your performance during the day. And I know that if you don't get your calories in at the right time and your blood sugar starts to tank and you have a hypoglycemic reaction, it's going to take a few hours for the body to restore homeostasis despite eating. And so then now you're performing suboptimally for those few hours. And if you continue to mismanage that, right, by, I don't know, thinking that it's okay to continue to skip that meal and have some sort of like loaded coffee product with stuff, it's not going to do it. Right. And then you're going to be there the whole day until you go to bed feeling like what did you do wrong that day? You're going to feel like you really went in the wrong direction, and for good reason, because you went away from aligning with what your body needed. So for women in their reproductive years, the cycle syncing method is your best bet to really, deeply supporting this new biological rhythm that you're now aware of, the infraredian circadian rhythms, and to really keeping your hormones performing optimally, not just estrogen and progesterone throughout the cycle, but also the big important master hormones like insulin and cortisol, right? And for our teen girls, as soon as they start their first bleed, this is what they have to be doing too, right? There's no time to wait. They're having a cycle. So they should be cycle syncing, right? It's really, really important that you educate them about that. And I think as a mother, I have a young daughter, and, she's last year alone, I was on so many podcasts. She started coming to me randomly. It was so I don't know. I wish I could find the right adjective. Cute is one adjective, but also really moving, that she came to me and said, Mom, you're so interesting. The things that you talk about are so interesting. And I was like, well, I'm glad you think so, because you're going to be learning more about this as you get older. But you have these biological rhythms, and they're what we have to support. But even introducing that to her at 6 and 7, right, is such an interesting little seed to plant, because when she's 9 and 11, the prep conversation I'll be having with her, which I think we should all be having with our daughters at 9, 10, 11, 12, right, is not, oh, by the way, you're going to have this thing happen once a month and it's a period and it could be a problem and here's how you use pads. This is not the thing that's going to inspire someone about their bodies, right? And we're going about that conversation, I think, totally, it needs a major upgrade. And I think the upgrade that we have is we start to say, hey, we have this second biological clock that's going to get activated at a certain age, around 12. And it's going to have you go from feeling the same every day, which is how you feel as a kid, to feeling different 4 different ways throughout the month. And that's how you're going to know you're in your womanhood phase. And all that means is that you just have to learn 4 different self-care routines that you use as these things change throughout the month. You just repeat them every month. And I'll help you figure that out. And the way that you're going to know that this cycle has started is you're going to have this thing called a period, right? I think if we had that conversation with our teenage girls, they would be on a completely different trajectory in terms of the relationship with their body. There'd be no period trauma. Right. They would be excited about having access to this really exciting biological rhythm that gives them superpowers in different ways throughout them. We haven't even talked about the effects on brain chemistry. And so creativity and productivity, right? And if we set them up to be excited about their biology, right, then they will be very, very easily interested in doing the self-care that is needed for their biology, right?
We got to bring you back to talk about the brain piece, because I have a whole spiel on that. Just firsthand with my daughter, and watching that shift, from a brain a cognitive and emotional standpoint, it's been fascinating. So we'll have to bring you back to talk about that.
Happy to come back. But I mean,
interesting. I love this topic so much. I think it's such an open space where we've got to make an imprint. So where can everyone connect with you, learn more about you, find In the Flow, all of this other good stuff? Let our watchers and listeners know.
You can get the book anywhere books are sold. If you want to get a bunch of free downloads to support your biological rhythm, you can do that at intheflowbook.com. Turns out you can even synchronize your skincare routine with your rhythm, because it affects the thickness of your skin, the sebaceous output of your skin. It's really fascinating. You can, if you're having any sort of period issue that you need help with around menstruation, fertility, or perimenopause, you can come to our digital hormonal healthcare center called flowliving.com. If you are interested in diving in, you are so excited about this, you want to start the cycle syncing method, you can go to cyclesyncingmembership.com. And we are very happy to extend to your listeners a first free month of this membership. You just have to put in the code Dr. Taz. And we also have this, you can see it behind my shoulder here, something I'm really proud of, formulating, these hormonal patterns need a little extra support. And so I formulated the first cycle syncing supplement kit to really help you in each of the 4 phases of your cycle. So you can check that out on the Flow Living website. And if you want to purchase them, you can also get 15% off with Dr. Taz 15. And then you can find us on social at Flow Living and at alisa.vitti.
Wonderful. I love having you on. We will have to bring you back. I hope all of you listening and watching today really, really enjoyed this particular episode. It's so important to educate not only ourselves, but any other family member that you know who is so confused about hormones. And that includes our little ones, like my 13-year-old daughter and all of her friends. So this is a really important topic. Thank you, Alisa, for being with us today. I appreciate it so much. For everybody else watching this episode, of Superwoman Wellness, don't forget to rate and review it and share it with your friends. I will see you guys next time.